Welcome to our program, Congressman Davis.
Good to be back with you.
Ukraine and US have signed a so-called minerals deal. Also, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky had a phone call with US President Donald Trump. How can you assess the main results and the consequences of signing this minerals deal between Ukraine and the US, and how could this influence ceasefire negotiations?
Well, I think we should look at these as two separate issues initially. The good aspect of the minerals deal is that it will tie the Ukrainian and American economies more closely together, which is a definite positive. The other thing that I would say related to this, though, is as more details are worked out, it's very important that it become a true win-win situation for both the Ukrainian people and also for the American people. The one thing that Americans do not want is to exploit or take advantage of another country's resources when they're in crisis. And the key to this is open discussion and a transparent and open process by both sides. I'm very hopeful that in the long run, the infrastructure can be built jointly, and this will lead to both economic development and tighter economic ties between both our countries. Regarding the phone call with President Trump, many of us in the United States have not understood, particularly those of us that go back to service during the Cold War and later, and understanding Russia, do not understand the negotiation approach that the Trump administration took at the beginning. I was personally very angry, along with many of my former colleagues and current colleagues, over the embarrassing meeting in the White House at the end of February. However, I think reality has intruded and proven the point that President Zelensky was trying to make, that Russia does not honor agreements. Those of us that go back some time into the 70s and 1980s at the beginning of our service understand one fact in dealing with the Soviet Union, or now the Russian leadership, that Russia has never kept any agreement that it has ever made in its modern history. And it only uses those agreements to buy time, and will violate them with impunity at their convenience to get what they want. So there is no integrity and, frankly, no honor in these agreements. Therefore, Russia only understands one thing, and that is power. A majority of Americans want continued support, and my hope is that this will come at two levels. First, the sanctions that the president and others in the administration have talked about, done correctly, would be very damaging to what's left of the Russian market economy. Regardless of their mobilization levels and some of the panic in the intellectual press, as Ukrainians on the ground see this, though Russia is committing atrocities, though they are violating virtually every known law of war, their economy is dying, as well as their demographics are collapsing in their population. And these economic sanctions can further accelerate that. And the second thing I think that's important as part of this is not only restarting the pipeline of military support aggressively, but is increasing the volume to make sure that Ukraine has sustainable levels of munitions. Europe is certainly stepping up, and that has been very encouraging. We're in a time of transition right now, but why I think that conversation at the Vatican, at Pope Francis's funeral, and then the more recent conversation is important, is in being able to manage the relationship effectively from the Ukrainian side with the current White House.
Let's cover also recent statements from Donald Trump's administration. US Vice President J.D. Vance says that Russia is asking too much in negotiations over a ceasefire in Ukraine. What is your reaction to this? And do you see this as a turning point after which Trump's team will finally realize that Putin is not interested in ceasefire?
I have found if it were not for the tragedy and the terrible cost that Ukraine has had to pay, some of the early negotiating behavior could almost be part of a comedy movie. However, the reality of the changes are, I think, beginning to hit at the White House. And the one thing that President Trump does not like, regardless of one's opinion of him, is he does not like to be made to look like a fool or to be embarrassed, regardless of the reality of the situation. And I think that he is finally concluding that, and certainly his advisors have shared this with him repeatedly, that he's being played and manipulated by Putin, who never had any intent of coming to a peaceful resolution. I think we saw this from the standpoint of that silly painting that Putin sent to the president as a gift. And, these are the kinds of things I am certainly not used to in my 40 years of, or almost 50 years of experience with the military and government. But the one thing that I will say is the message has come through, and we're now seeing our national leadership walking back their positions that were very clearly one-sided before, and beginning to recognize the reality of Russia's non-compliance with its own statements that it has made. The latest, and I think, again, proving this point, was the so-called ceasefire from May 8th to May 11th to protect his victory parade in Moscow to celebrate the Second World War. And having violated that nearly 700 times with attacks on Ukrainian positions, clearly states their lack of integrity. I think the one aspect of current Russian history that the Russians conveniently forget is they would not have been able to defeat Germany had it not been for all of the support the United States industrial base gave, including 300,000 heavy trucks, so they could move their army. And, I think the mythology of Russia as a great power is coming into play as truly a weak country that's dying demographically and making a last gasp at its neighbors to reclaim its empire.
From your perspective, how do you see the main scenarios, how the Trump's administration will move forward in this ceasefire negotiations? U.S. President Donald Trump says that his administration is moving closer to the moment after which Trump would be forced to make serious decisions, would have to make serious decisions regarding Russia. Do you see this as signs that Trump is ready to impose sanctions against Russia, or do you have any kind of hope that Trump administration will also consider providing Ukraine with military aid and military assistance?
I believe that there's a good probability that significant military aid will be restarted. I can't say on the timing. Unfortunately, many of the advisors to the president have no national security experience in the sense of understanding conflict and what it takes to resolve or to prevent that conflict. The reality, I think, is going to continue to intrude itself into this discussion on the United States side. But as I've said before, there's a significant majority in this country that wants support for Ukraine to continue. And even more importantly, Republicans in the Senate, and there's a little bit less in the House right now, but there's a significant center of mass of members, a very clear majority when both parties are put together to maintain support to see this thing through to preserve freedom in the West. And That will be an ongoing dialogue. However, I am hopeful, and I think it's important as well that Europe is stepping up. The Nordic countries continue to step up. France and Germany are moving in the right direction now, despite some internal political problems. And I think one of the more interesting actions, going back to the days when we in the West would watch the May Day parade to see who was standing next to the Soviet leadership. The great story to me was who was not there. And when you consider that virtually no European leaders of any credibility, other than Mr. Fico, whose credibility I think is in question anyway, were guests. No significant leaders from the West came. It was a collection of authoritarian governments and a few other countries that are trying to maintain some neutrality. But to me, the whole parade was really a gasp of trying to show strength when, in fact, the underlying nation is quite weak in terms of its economic power, its sustaining economic power and population, as well as its ability to truly generate a long-term capability to conduct the war before its economy collapses.
You just mentioned about the Putin's military parade in Moscow. However, Chinese leader Xi Jinping also visited this parade. He met with Russian dictator Putin. Moreover, they prepared a unified statement, and Chinese government repeated Putin's propaganda objectives of the war. They finally supported Putin's military objectives, saying that there should be the solving of the problems of this conflict, just as Russian propaganda is talking about this. How can you assess the results of this meeting between Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping?
Well, I think what this meeting and their statement clearly shows is something we have known for the last 3 years, that China does support this war, that China has been involved. China has been shipping weapon systems, parts for weapon systems, dual-use parts that can be put into weapon systems, as well as providing other trade and financial support to Russia. Putin and Xi Jinping have one desire in common strategically, and that is to break the United States and NATO's influence in the West. And the way to break NATO, in their view, is for a decisive victory in Ukraine. I do not believe the Russian army has that capability now, even in the best of circumstances. However, the other statement we have to understand is that Xi Jinping has turned inward. His economy is also in trouble, and without significant trade with the West, it's on a path to great problems. Not to mention the fact that they are in demographic collapse and are likely to lose 500 million people in their current population by 2050. All of that said, it's a statement that simply clarified what we knew anyway. And from a perspective of protecting freedom in the free West or Western countries, the OECD nations and Ukraine, as well as the countries on NATO's flank and in the Western Pacific, the key is victory here. I think it will certainly cause China to reconsider its aggressive mercantile and military advances that it's trying to make. I think it will also have a significant likelihood to isolate Iraq. I think as reality sinks in more in Washington, the more we will come back to the solutions that actually work in the long term. But the one thing that is so key to this success and has impressed me greatly, has impressed others greatly, is the resilience of the Ukrainian people. And it's inspiring, frankly, to see a country that has been standing so consistently. And I understand there are problems and challenges in any nation that's at war, but the desire of Ukraine to stand, to protect freedom of religion and worship, to seek to innovate as quickly as possible has been a huge embarrassment to Russia, that's tried to portray itself as a strongman And so a country 4 times the size of Ukraine has attacked Ukraine, and they're frankly being defeated at the operational and the strategic level. I think that Chris Cavoli, the commander of NATO and the Supreme Allied Commander from the United States, has put it very succinctly and correctly that Russia is losing this war and has lost it strategically, and all the West and Ukraine needs to do is stand firm. And what the West needs to do is support Ukraine in every way possible. And I personally believe, ultimately, as this resolves farther down the road, the natural progression would be Ukraine to come into the European Union and ultimately be part of a security arrangement with security guarantees from the NATO partners and from the West, regardless of how that works out, to provide a long-term deterrent to Russian and Chinese aggression.
How do you see the next mechanism and the next steps for the Trump's administration in the matter of military support for Ukraine? Can you imagine a scenario in which U.S. Congress will pass another aid package for Ukraine, or Trump's team will approve only sale of weapons to Ukraine using European resources, European money?
I do not know the final answer to that. I want to be honest. The one thing that I can say from my many years related to government service, I would say this, that how it is explained in the public and how it actually occurs behind the scenes may be 2 different things. It may be called purchases of weapons, but there are a lot of ways that that can be put together in a contract. So I would be concerned less about the language that's used in public, but the reality of the actions that come behind the scenes. And I think there is a good possibility of a range of programs ranging from European co-production programs in Ukraine, as well as continued pipeline in the long run for United States systems as well. The thing that's not really understood by the people in America who've unfortunately become victims of the Russian propaganda is that the war is coming out very differently operationally than publicly perceived. And as you well know, there is a lot of information, misinformation that's flying around about how this works. I think the one thing that is very important for the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian people, civil society to do is to engage in their own positive, truthful information operation, communicating across the full spectrum of civil society in America of the situation on the ground. I think as an example, Colby Barrett, who I got to know with some humanitarian work related to Ukraine last year, has released an amazing movie called A Faith Under Siege that portrays in stark terms the reality of what Russia is doing and what Ukraine is fighting for, simply from the perspective of a person's desire to maintain their faith. And things like that, testimonies of people become very critical. So I think the more information that Ukraine can put out to the West through social networks, through social media, through earned media on television, in print, telling their stories and connecting with people at a personal level. One thing that's the center of gravity, I believe, in this nation are women, specifically mothers over 40 years of age in America, to hear firsthand from women in Ukraine about the impact of this war, and all that Ukrainian people are asking for is help. To paraphrase Franklin Roosevelt, our great president during World War II, when your neighbor's house is on fire and he asks for a fire hose, it's okay to lend it to him. And I think that desire reflects the heart of the American people ultimately. And the more Ukraine can do to get that truth out and to get that message out will help Americans who are in positions to influence this to see the most positive outcome from the war.
Thank you, Congressman Davis, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you very much, and we will trust for victory in the long term. Godspeed.